All right. Good week 6, everybody. Hard to believe that we have met week 6, but here we are, uh, week 6. This week, our lesson is on the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to try to do a little bit of a shorter PowerPoint than last week, but I'm going to try to hit on some of the big key elements about the Industrial Revolution. First of all, before you think about answering what, where, when, and in what industry, let me say this. The Industrial Revolution is incredibly significant to the world that we live in today, and that's one of the things that I hope this presentation conveys. Um, the Industrial Revolution um, directly it led to population booms. It led to the development of new technologies. It led to technologies that have facilitated globalized transport and trade, but also technologies that have led to wide scale environmental pollution, deforestation, and even today the current issue that we have today with climate change. So these all go back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Our world that we live in today is a product, right down to your smartphone, is a product of the Industrial Revolution. So where and when and in what industry? Well, first of all, you look at what you see here, and this is the textile industry. Um, the earliest innovation to really drive the Industrial Revolution was the steam engine, invented by James Watt. And the steam engine was primarily put to use in things like the textile industry and mines, in mining operations in places like Great Britain, and of course ultimately locomotion. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But what you see here is a mechanized, industrial, textile mill. And of course, as you read in your book, mechanization comes with a cost, and the cost for the individual is that skilled laborers who used to be used in things like textile, industry, their skills become irrelevant, and it hurts workers' wages. It hurt workers' conditions. Women, for example, used to get women often worked in textile mills, and women used to get a form of um, of black lung of their own, just like miners from the fibers that were up in the air, just like miners got it from the coal dust. Women get it from the fibers that are in the air of these factories. But work in a factory in the Industrial Revolution transformed the world for people. People no longer did their work at their homes. Instead, people had to follow a boss. They had to follow a time clock. They had to be at work at a factory 6 days a week. They had to work very dangerous, but also very mundane machines. It was loud. It was bad for your health. And it drove workers' wages down, and it drove workers' conditions and workers' rights down because workers didn't have the skill to bring to the fore. And so in the textile industry, women were worked by and large. The individuals in the foreground here are almost certainly the foreman of this operation. And in the background, of course, you see the women. Those are all the workers. Women worked in the textile industry, and it was a very hard sweatshop style labor, where you're talking, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. That's for working class women. Now, a middle class woman, um, who has who is middle class or upper class, their industrial revolution took them out of the manufacturing loop, and instead middle class women were confined effectively to the realm of domesticity, being homemakers, wives and grandmothers, and so on and so forth. Now, why Great Britain? Really because of geography, resources. Um, these are the most significant factors, at first, at least. Resources, coal, lots of iron ore. It's a small island, and it's cut off by the English Channel from the fighting that was ravaging Europe during this time period. This is the time period, during um, they had just had the 30 Years' War, and Europe was very much divided by ever raging conflicts, and Great Britain was more contained from that. Also, of course, the Enlightenment political thinkers that we talked about last test, John Locke and Adam Smith, the political and economic approaches that took the initiative away from a single monarch and instead put it in the hands of an entrepreneurial businessman. Taking, for John Locke, putting government in the hands of everyday individuals away from monarch. Well, not necessarily everyday individuals, but taking it away from an aristocratic line and instead giving it to a representative people. Adam Smith, the idea of private wealth. These were significant, and of course they're developed in England, what we call joint stock companies. And these were private firms that were designed to explore the world and make a profit, and as well as other types of economic enterprises. And so Great Britain was poised for the Industrial Revolution because of these things. What this map shows you is that the different color of Great Britain shows you that by 1850 it was vastly more urban than the rest of continental Europe. So this is in a museum. This is the earliest steam engine. James Watt invented the steam engine in 1775. It was used, it didn't have a lot of power, these steam engines, these early steam engines. They were used to pump water out of mines. Eventually, of course, they'll be used to tow the cars, like on a rail line out of the mine. They were used to run looms, like mechanical looms and textile mills and things like this. And of course, they were also used for locomotion, movement. And of course, locomotion in the 1800s was railroads and steamships. Um, these railroads and the steamship really were important, the steamship and the railroad, because they interconnected the world. Um, they were able to speed the process of resource exploitation, of global expansion. Okay, it's technologies like this in North America, for example, the railroad makes it possible for the United States to really control the entirety of the continent and move huge amounts of iron ore from places like Minnesota to Andrew Carnegie steel mills. Steamship technology really allows for the rise of what we call the high imperialism, which we'll be talking about in the next lesson, in which Europeans colonized Africa, Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam were colonized in the 1800s. And it was steamship technology, as well as a number of other key technologies, that really made this possible. And it's really at this point that we're really seeing a truly globalized world with items like U.S. cotton, Argentine beef, Chilean copper, diamonds from Africa, and so on and so forth. You're seeing, rubber from Vietnam being taken by Michelin Rubber. It's an interconnected world, and it's this new technology of locomotion and power, the steam ship in the steam engine, that makes this possible. Now, the way a steam engine works basically is that you have a boiler and you use a fire of some kind to heat up the water inside the boiler, and that creates steam, which is then used to push the valves and push the pistons, move the valves and push the pistons. And so usually an early steam engine burned wood, but ultimately the steam engines burn coal, which is very, very dirty. And of course, you can see by these images how dirty the coal smoke was at this time. And of course, coal was also used in heating, and coal created some of the earliest smog problems in places like London. So I want to put all these up here for you guys. Um, the Industrial Revolution, the usage of fossil fuels, dirty fossil fuels like coal, for example, to drive steam engines. Later, of course, petrochemicals to drive internal combustion engines, to to heat homes, and so on and so forth, and to drive the machines at massive factories. It created a couple of things. One, it creates huge urban expansion, and of course, cities like New York use rail lines, the subway, to interconnect them, as do London, London is pictured here. But it also results in the Industrial Revolution results in mass deforestation, mined and pockmarked landscapes. Um, Working conditions become more dirty, more grueling, longer hours, more dangerous because of the machines. Women themselves made susceptible to incredibly dangerous conditions in the textile mills. And coal burning in cities like London, for example. And also, this happened too in the United States, in places near Pittsburgh during the steel boom. But these dirty industries produced horrible air pollution, not unlike what you see in Beijing today, by the way. And this here is a case of what was called the London fog from the early 1950s. And what you're seeing there is all air pollution. And this incredible pollution from the industrial era, they've actually discovered that they believe that it was the soot from the Industrial Revolution, this first Industrial Revolution, that actually caused much of the alpine glacial melt. Um, and that's because the soot covered the snow with a darker matter, the soot, and that attracted more heat, which led to it melting. Here's another image of industrial era. You see the low smokestacks? The low smokestacks facilitated a lot of this very intense ground level air pollution. Industrial revolution results in a massive population boom, okay? And this results in a world today we have 7 billion people. And this massive population boom was brought on by a couple of things. One was, of course, in general, the Columbian Exchange. And the Columbian Exchange is, of course, facilitated or sped by the Industrial Revolution. But also the industrialization of agriculture, migration of workers to farm more land with industrial type machines. Um, of course, industrialization results in the ability um, to build more, to heat more. And so the Industrial Revolution speeds the Columbian Exchange, the movement of important goods, important foods. Were all sped by the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution, it is not a coincidence that the Industrial Revolution comes alongside a massive population boom. People started living longer. Infant mortality rates went down. And this was directly connected to the growth in industrial technology, which was applied to improvements of conditions in other areas, and in medicine and science and so on and so forth, while also simultaneously contributing to environmental devastation and in very poor health conditions and working conditions for many laborers. According to J.R. McNeill, who is a very famous author, he's an environmentalist historian, he said that the Industrial Revolution changed the world by making available cheap energy, cheap water, and cheap food. And so he says that this was what allowed people to escape what's called the Malthusian trap. And the Malthusian trap was that human populations were always naturally regulated by their environment before the Industrial Revolution. Um, and so you could only grow as far as, the land would allow you to grow food, that there would be enough rain, that the environmental conditions would allow you, and disease and so on and so forth. The Industrial Revolution together, providing cheap energy, cheap food, and available water, the Industrial Revolution changes that and gives people the opportunity to break out of this. And it allows for populations to grow to huge proportions, to such a point today that we farm plots of land that could have never been considered imaginable. And we feed amounts of people that we could have never envisioned imaginable. But we also have, of course, with that population, there are new problems that humanity must consider and deal with. The 20th century, here you have an image of the first Indy 500 in 1911. And the Indy 500 was an example of the petrochemical boom. Oil was first discovered in Pennsylvania in 1859 at what was known as Drake's Folly. Pennsylvania, by the way, was one of the first oil fields. But of course, later, of course, the movement to places like Texas and the discovery of oil in places like Texas and California, out west, and Wyoming, of course, became large oil fields too. Henry Ford, of course, revolutionized industrialization with mass production and the usage of the assembly line. He applied, the technique of interchangeable parts, which was actually developed by Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney developed interchangeable parts to be used by the armed services in the United States long before mass production and assembly line technology was born. But Ford, by the way, um, I'll talk about Suburbia in a little bit, but Ford was able to use the assembly line to mass produce, to produce more cars more cheaply than ever. And he also, of course, as we talked about, he paid workers enough so that they could be able to afford the most reasonably priced car, which was, of course, the Model T, which you could get for the equivalent of what today would be about $8,000 in 1911. In 1911, it was what I think $323 on a worker's wage, and these were not bought on credit; these were bought outright. Um, but of course, the Model T was a very basic industrial machine that could be used on farms. It had thin tires to allow it to go through rutted roads. We didn't have great paved roads then. Um, the Model T was only available in one color, which was black. So it was a practical, efficient use machine, but it was designed to be mass consumed. And that's what the Industrial Revolution really does ultimately in creating a consumer culture, a culture of mass consumption. By the 1950s, of course, suburbia, we see expanded cities, we see people living further out, driving every single day, owning a couple of cars. And of course, um, this results in issues with large scale photochemical smog from the usage of buses and cars, in addition to trucks and trains, and of course, the large industrial facilities that are providing energy and are burning coal. Um, Places like Los Angeles, the automotive industry played a fundamental role in helping them to abandon mass transit, what would be a cleaner mass transit, in favor of automotive-based transit, internal combustion engine-based transit. And these were very significant developments. And of course, they've led to um, issues of air quality throughout the globe. And we've got these. We're trying to continue to get these under control. But photochemical smog, global warming, these types of things are certainly a product of this incredibly quick and incredibly large scale industrialization and use of fossil fuels. And this is the last slide. We have seen industrial revolution have taken us to the development of tremendously huge megacities. And you're looking at, I want to say this is, I don't want to misspeak. This is a Chinese city. I think this is Shanghai. If it's not Shanghai, it's Hong Kong. I'm pretty sure this is Shanghai. Excuse me for forgetting what picture it is, but it's a major city in China, and this was 2 years ago during one of the very bad pollution periods. And of course, cities like Mexico City, Los Angeles have huge problems with photochemical smog. There's other factors too, geographical factors and such. And there are cases of cities that do better jobs than others. Tokyo, which I've been to, is kind of a green megacity. But we have huge problems today with pollution on a global scale. And this pollution is absolutely rooted to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which has resulted in huge population growths, but also in other more large-scale environmental problems.